Hey Skyfarers, Arcanine Admiral here with a video to help you decide whether you should build Endrinriggers or Skywardens. It's a common question. You see it on Facebook and WhatsApp, Discord all the time. I just bought 2 start collecting sets, or I've just bought 8 for Wars or the Battleforce box, or I've got X amount of these guys. Should I build Endrinriggers? Should I build Skywardens? And what weapons should I give them? And the common answer is Endrinriggers, which is, it's a decent answer. Misses out some of the nuances and things because they're not always the best choice. They're the best choice the majority of the time, and always. And then occasionally people will answer with a more detailed answer, but people don't always have the time to do that, and everyone wants to read an essay on Facebook. So I thought I'd do a video on it because I think that'd be helpful to people to have this resource to look at. That goes into the details and gives a more nuanced answer. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to go through the differences between the units, the weapon options, their abilities, how the different units synergize with the rest of your army, the other units, ships, battalions, skyports, that sort of thing. Have a little bit of a look at the map hammer, the different weapon options, common build options that I've seen people use when I've looked at tournament lists, and then if all of that isn't enough to help you decide what you want to do, I've got some suggestions as well on how to build them. Also, I've also got one sort of tip/hack for when you're building them to make your units more flexible, so you can sort of pivot from one style of build to another without spending a fortune. And no, it's not just using magnets, although I will talk about magnets as well a little bit, because I've got some tips regarding them as well. But no, I've got a great sort of tip for people that don't like using magnets. So I'm going to jump into the information in a minute, but bear in mind, most of this advice is from the perspective of you don't have a list you're working towards, or you don't have an exact list that you're working towards. Obviously, if you do have a list you want to play, you've seen a list in one of our other shows, or you've seen one that's been at a tournament and you want to just build towards that, then, by all means do it. If you've got a list idea, then it's, build towards that list idea is always the best thing to do. But it's more for people that are a bit unsure about what they want to do. And then the other thing is, this is from the perspective of not being Skyport specific, with the exception of Barrack Zon, because once you go to Barrack Zon, it is completely different. Basically, it has a massive impact. So I've tried to, keep things quite generalist for advice that will work in all Skyports. So yeah, but if you do want to just build towards a specific list, then by all means check out some of the other videos on the channel, and you'll see some great examples of lists. So let's jump in and have a look at the details. So, as I mentioned, the common answer is Endrinriggers are better. That's true the majority of the time, probably about 70% of the time, I would say. But like I said, it misses some nuances, and there are some cases where they're not. The reason people get this answer, though, is the map hammer just maps out marginally better for Endrinriggers. So, they're the same point. So, the fact that they are slightly better is that the weapon range on the pistols for the Endrinriggers, the river guns, is just longer, which is significant with fly high. And the abilities for the two different units is the Endrinrigger's ability is something you're more likely to be able to engineer into a game that you can use, the more under your control, whereas the Skywarden's abilities are a little bit more situational, depending on whether you come up this sort of opponent you come up against. And I'm going to cover some of those things in a bit more detail in a minute, but before I do, I want to talk about what the differences are between the units from a really basic perspective. In case you've literally just bought these, or you haven't even bought them yet, and you just don't know what the differences are. So this is the most basic type of unit you can have for either Endrinriggers or Skywardens. They're their bog standard weapon profiles. So if you have Skywardens, then all of the models in a Skywarden unit can have a sky pike, which is a long thing here, with a pistol, pistols, and then they can all have sky mines. This guy has got a sky mine, this one here, but it's cropped out, so it doesn't interfere with the title there. So yeah, that's basic. That's what a basic standard Skyward looks like, and a basic standard Endrinrigger. They can all have an achromatic saw and a pistol. Now, the pistols and the swords are in a different. The melee weapons and the pistols are in different hands of different units, and the main difference really is that Endrinriggers don't have the sky mines. Now, technically, they do have different head options. Don't worry about that. Completely forget it, because first of all, 99% of the opponents won't even know the difference between the different head options. If you come up against another Kharadron Overlords player, they might know the difference, but 99% of them won't care if you've got the wrong heads, even if they do notice it, because head swaps is just a common thing in the game. Okay, you'll see people going out playing with Endrinriggers and they don't have either of these heads because they put Longbeard heads on or something. So don't worry about the head options. So that's the most basics of the units. Now, if you wanted to, you could magnetize between these. You can magnetize the sky mines with some magnets here. You can magnetize the under the shoulders there to swap the pistols and the melee weapons around. Honestly, I don't think you really need to. You might want to consider magnetizing the sky mines, mostly from a perspective of they snap off easily. Like transport with them is a pain. So that's something you might want to consider, but I don't think you need to magnetize them. Obviously, if you want to go the magnetizing route, then that's up to you. It's great. It's a great option to give you flexibility, but you can do a flexible build without doing magnets there. Okay, so that's the basic, visual appearance of these units. But it's a little bit more complicated that because they come in units of 3, and 1 in 3 models of the unit can swap their pistol and melee weapon for a volley gun. And both Skywardens and Endrinriggers have that option. The volley gun has longer range, 24 inches. It does more damage than their normal pistols, but then obviously you lose your melee threat. Now, if you do that, then they still have or don't have sky mines, depending whether you're building Skywardens or Endrinriggers. But really, that's the only visual difference, other than the heads, which I said before, don't worry about, is from a visual perspective, when your opponent's looking at a unit, they go, oh, well, that's the only way they can tell between, if that's the only model left in the unit, whether it's a Skywarden and Endrinrigger, is the Skywardens. Now, so that's 1 in 3 models in the unit. The another model in the unit, so 1 in 3 again, but separate to this. So you can have a volley gun and this other option. 1 in 3 can do this. They can have basically a gun that has 3 options in itself. So to explain it is, this is the gun, yeah, and then you can have these 3 different tips. So it's the same weapon. So you can't physically build, say, a unit of 3 with this option and this option, and also you can't do that from a rules perspective. It's only 1 in 3 can have this, or 1 in 3 can have this, or this. So what those weapons are is a skyhook, a grapnel launcher, and a drill cannon. They all have 24-inch range. They have similar damage profiles, and then they have abilities. So the skyhook gives you +1 to charge, which is this one. The grapnel stops enemy units from retreating if they're in combat with the unit, and I think within range of that particular model as well. And the drill cannons, drill launcher, that on an unmodified roll of 6 does a flat 3 mortal wounds instead of the damage the weapon normally does. Now, in terms of damage output, there is a little bit of difference between the drill cannon and the grapnel and skyhook options. Grapnel and skyhook, for example, are exactly the same stats, but they do a flat 3 damage with -2 rend, and the drill cannon does D3 damage, but it's -3 rend. Really, that kind of comes out fairly similar. It's mostly your choice between whether you take this, or this comes down to the abilities. And both Skywardens and Endrinriggers can have those options. So when you're thinking about building Endrinriggers or Skywardens, if you're building a melee unit, then they're going to be significantly different because all of the models, or the majority of the models in the unit, are going to be different. If you're going to build units with the long-range shooty guns, then only 1 in 3 models in the unit, 1/3 of the unit, is going to have that basic standard melee weapon and pistol that makes the units different. And then also they have the sky mines. So that's something to really bear in mind is when you're comparing the two units is if you want them for like a long range shooting role, they're actually going to be extremely similar. So let's talk about the capabilities of these units and the other differences. So I mentioned on the TLDR screen that the weapon ranges on the pistols were different. So Endrinriggers have a 12-inch range pistol, Skywardens have a 9-inch range pistol, and that's really important when you're flying high with these units because when the Sky Vessel can fly high, Endrinriggers and Skywardens both have the option to hitch alongside. And when they're set up after hitching, they have to be set up more than 9 inches away from enemy models. Now, if you've got a 9-inch range weapon, so you can hit things that are exactly 9 inches away or less, but you're more than 9 inches away, then you won't be in range to shoot anything. So that's probably the big, most important difference between Endrinriggers and Skywardens is that weapon range on the pistols, because they do similar amounts of damage. It really comes down to the range. One of the other important differences is the melee weapons. Now, Skywardens have 2-inch range melee, 2 attacks each, hit on 4s, wound on 3s, -1 rend, D3 damage, and then the Endrinriggers have 1-inch range, only 1 attack, and they hit on 3s, wound on 2s, -2 rend, and D3 damage. Now, they actually map out relatively similar as well. Endrinriggers do map out slightly better, and yeah, there's that. But they do map out slightly better on Endrinriggers, but there is this issue with the number of attacks. Now, there are some players that they prefer to just have more dice to roll because there's a thing with statistics and things is when you're talking about averages is you don't always get the average. For instance, if you have a unit of Endrinriggers and you roll your dice, and if one of them, just gets an unlucky roll, then that's going to significantly drop down the average. Whereas with almost double the amount of attacks with Skywardens, one unlucky roll will swing your average a lot more. It all comes down to the law of large numbers and how many dice you're rolling. So there's this weird inverse relationship between Skywardens and Endrinriggers with reliability, whereas Skywardens you're rolling more dice, but Endrinriggers you're rolling less dice, but their actual stats are more likely to go through. So hitting on a 3 is more likely than hitting on a 4, and wounding on a 2 is more likely than wounding on a 3. And then also the rend is different. In most cases, that won't make a huge amount of difference. If you come up against something with a 2+ save, then Endrinriggers are potentially going to get more damage through, or if you come up against something with a save of 6, then the extra rend on Endrinriggers won't make any difference. The range of the weapons is interesting because these models are on 32mm base, which typically in the game, having a 1-inch range weapon would be terrible on a base that size. But because they're generally in small units, it doesn't really make any difference. The only time that 2-inch range melee is really going to make a big difference for you is if you're taking like a unit of 12. Okay, so that's the basic sort of stats covered of their stock options in terms of pistols and melee weapons. Let's look at some of their abilities. So Skywardens have sky mines. We mentioned them earlier when we looked at the visual appearance of the unit. Basically, the way sky mines work is if an enemy unit that can fly charges and finishes their charge move in range of the Skywardens, then you roll a dice for each model in the enemy unit, and on a 6+, they take a mortal wound. Now, the important part about that is A, it's a 6+, so not very likely, and B, that it's based on the number of models in the enemy unit, which is very important because typically, actually, flying units are quite elite units in the game. It's not very often you'll see big hordes of flying units. Obviously, Nighthawk being the exception, but if you know anything about the meta of the game at the moment, is Nighthawk are relatively bad. You don't really need the help when facing up against Nighthawk. So, and then other things that fly are things like Maw Crushers, Terror guys, Zombie Dragons, even a enemy Kharadron Overlords player, they charge you with their Ironclad. You're going to be rolling 1 dice. If you roll 1 dice, you've got 1 in 6 chance of doing mortal wounds. So it's you're not going to get a large amount of mortal wounds from the Skywardens, maybe 1 or 2 in most instances. And don't forget, often your opponent might choose not to charge them, or they might choose to charge another unit and then pile in onto your Skywarden. So your opponent can get around that a little bit. Their other ability is that when they retreat, you roll a dice for each enemy unit within 3 inches of your Skywardens, and then it's 1 dice per unit, and on a 4+, they take D3 mortal wounds. So that's more likely to go off than the sky mines, but it's when you retreat. So the timing of that is very important because you can't retreat until the turn after combat. So depending on, you've got to survive combat basically, and depending on the turn order goes, you might have to survive 2 rounds of combat, 2 turns, your turn and your opponent's turn of combat before you can retreat. And Skywardens and Endrinriggers both have 2 wounds. Both only have unit multiples of 3, so you might have a unit of 3, 6, 9, 12. Not big units with two wounds and a 4+ save. They're relatively fragile, honestly. So don't necessarily expect that to happen very often. And then the other thing is, if you do that, you won't be able to shoot or charge because you'll be retreating. And another big thing about that is, if you're in combat with an enemy unit and a sky vessel flies high and you decide to hitch, that doesn't count as a retreat, so it won't trigger that ability. So the abilities for Skywardens are, they've got more abilities. They've got 2 abilities compared to the Endrinriggers 1, but both of them are a little bit lackluster and unreliable, and depend a lot more on what your opponent is able to do than what you're able to do. Whereas with Endrinriggers, their main ability is that they can heal ships. So if the unit is within 1 inch of a sky vessel, then at the start of your hero phase, you can roll a dice for each model in that unit, and on a 4+, the ship heals a wound. So that's relatively good. People are going to be trying to kill your ships, and if you can heal them, that's handy. It's not unheard of. In fact, it's actually quite common to hear stories from Kharadron Overlords player from tournaments where they go, well, I healed up 8 wounds on my ship at the beginning of the turn, or more than that potentially. That can be very frustrating for an opponent. They put a lot of effort into trying to say kill your ironclad and fail, and then you heal it up by a very large amount. And it can also be significant because flying high, which is probably the most important ability that a Kharadron Overlords player has in their toolkit, is dependent on how many wounds a sky vessel has taken. So the fact that you can potentially heal your ship before you get to the movement phase and try and fly high is very important, because it might take you from this point where you can't fly high to then you can fly high. Important thing to know about this, though, is you do have to be within an inch. So you don't necessarily always want your Endrinriggers within an inch of the ship. So there is that to consider. Placement of your models means that if you've got Endrinriggers, you need to try and place them closer to the sky vessels than the Skywardens. Skywardens can be set up much further away and sit further away without it really, having a negative impact on your game. So let's talk a little bit about how these units synergize with the rest of your army. So Skywardens, we'll do them first. They synergize with the Escort Wing battalion purely on the basis that the Escort Wing battalion lets you have Skywardens in it. It doesn't let you have Endrinriggers in it. So if you're playing Escort Wing, then putting Skywardens in it will help keep your drop count down, which is handy because two things about the Escort Wing battalion you should know is it doesn't have any models in it that are natively battle line. It has units in it that can be battle line in certain situations, such as it has the gun haulers, which can be battle line in Barrack Herbaz. It has thunderers that can be battle line in Barrack Nar, and the Skywardens can be battle line if you have an Engine Master with dirigible suit as your general. And it also doesn't include heroes, which you'll have to have at least one hero just to make your list legal, and really, to be honest, you need at least 2 heroes to actually make a viable list, in my opinion. Probably 3. So taking Escort Wing Battalion will push you towards a slightly higher drop list anyway. So being able to include units that can be battle line or just include Skywardens as part of the battalion is great for keeping your drop count a little bit lower. The other thing is that they will get every unit in the battalion gets to reroll hit rolls of 1 in the shooting phase against 1 enemy unit of your choice per turn, which is decent. It's okay. It does buff all of the units in the battalion, so potentially you're giving a lot of units a buff, but it's not a very sizable buff. And to be honest, reroll 1s to hit is an ability you can just get all over the place. There's lots of ways to get reroll 1s to hit. Another thing about Skywardens is that they synergize really well with Barrack Zon, which is a skyport that has an ability that if you charge with a Skyfarer unit, which both is basically all your foot troops and your balloon boys, they all have the Skyfarer keyword. Skyfarers get +1 to wound if they charged, and Skywarden units get +1 to wound, but they also get +1 to hit. So they're getting +1 to hit and wound in Barrack Zone if they've charged. Now, Endrinriggers will get the +1 to wound, but as I mentioned on the previous screen, they wound on a 2+. Now, a natural roll of 1 will always fail. So that +1 to wound on Endrinriggers doesn't actually help at all unless your opponent has somewhere giving them -1 to wound, which is actually relatively rare. So yeah, Skywardens, their melee output can be dramatically improved from Barrack Zon, whereas Endrinriggers it's not. Lastly, Skywardens, they get bonuses if your opponent has flying units, because they do have the Sky Mines, and I know I said it wasn't, the best ability in the world, but it's a key difference between them and Endrinriggers. If there's a lot of flying units in your meta, particularly ones of larger sizes, then that's only helpful for Skywardens. So what about Endrinriggers? Endrinriggers synergize really well with sky vessels because they can heal them. They also synergize well with the Iron Sky Command Battalion. And when I say synergize, it's really just a case that you can include them in the battalion. It's the same thing with Skywardens going in the Escort Wing battalion. It's, helps keep your drop count down if you put Endrinriggers in the Iron Sky Command Battalion. Endrinriggers, like Skywardens, can be battle line if you have Endrin Master of Dirigible Suit against your general. So that's helpful for keeping that drop count down. And if drop count is really, really important to you, then you probably want to be looking towards the Iron Sky Command route and Endrinriggers, because you could potentially build a 1-drop or 2-drop list in that battalion, whereas an Escort Wing battalion list, you're going to be looking at higher drop count lists, probably more like 3, 4, maybe 5. Lastly, Endrinriggers synergize well with Endrin Masters, be that either the Endrin Master of Dirigible Suit, obviously because he makes them battle line, but also the Endrin Master of Endrin Harness. Both those Endrin Masters have a command ability, which when it's used, you pick a Endrinrigger unit when they're attempting to heal the ship, and they can re-roll those dice. So it goes from a 4+ to a 4+ re-rollable, so 50% chance of happening to 75% chance of happening. So that's handy. And to be honest, you don't have a huge amount to spend command points on anyway in this army. So being able to heal your ships even more is decent. And it's something you might use in game. So let's look at the math, because I've talked about a little bit or alluded to the differences being marginal in some cases. So first of all, let's look at the volley cannon, drill cannon, and the skyhooks as grapnels. Now, you can see the volley cannon maps out as the best. Drill cannon is a little bit further behind. Just note that this math does include the ability, just based on the chance of the ability going off, and then the math for skyhooks and grapnels are the least damage output, but they give you an ability to skyhooks to give +1 to charge and grapnels to stop enemies retreating. If you have those weapons and you don't have the normal melee weapon, whether it's a Skywarden or Endrinringer, so what you're left with, you literally just try and hit people with the butt of the gun. Honestly, that does nothing. So just assume that if you've got these long-range shooty weapons, then when it comes to melee, you're not going to be doing anything. You're going to be hitting people with pillows, basically. So if we look at the melee options between Endrinriggers and Skywardens, we've got your Endrinriggers saws and their pistols here, the rivet guns. They're fairly good. It's a good option. If you compare that to the volley guns, drill guns, skyhooks, and things, then it's not necessarily the case that one's rubbish and one's really bad. It's that they're both sort of viable. Obviously the rivet guns are lower damage output than the big guns, and they're also shorter range. But then the achromatic swords make up for it if you can get the unit into combat. And one thing to bear in mind about this is the achromatic swords map out lower than a volley cannon, but you get to fight in your opponent's phase with your melee weapons, whereas you don't get to do that with your shooting weapons. And obviously you're getting these two things combined potentially in your turn. If you shoot and then charge into your opponent, you will shoot them and then try and cut them up with your swords. Now, for Skywardens, they obviously have the vulcanizer pistols and skypipes, and you'll see that they map out slightly lower than the achromatic swords and the rivet guns for the Endrinriggers. But if you really compare them, this is the this is the swords and this is the skypikes. It's so marginal, right? It's not much difference at all. And then the same with the rivet guns and vulcanizer pistols. The actual damage output, it's not much difference. It's more the range that's the big deal on those pistols. So for that reason, I believe that when you're thinking about whether you should take Endrinriggers or Skywardens, you should be thinking about how you're going to be using the unit, the abilities. Are you going to be keeping the models close to the ship so then you can get the heal? Are you going to be, what skyport are you taking? And what battalion are you going to be taking? Because, drop count is important in the game, honestly. I know some people aren't that bothered about drop count, but for a Kharadron Overlords army, I think it's more important than it is for other armies because primarily a shooting army. Um, um, and with a shooting army, that means if you get the double turn, you just bring so much force to bear that it can win you the game, and vice versa. If your opponent gets the double turn on you and gets into melee with you, we can lose a lot. And also really get behind on points as well. So that's that. I've got a few other bits of information on here. So the blue here is if you're in Escort Wing, how much extra bonus you get. It's reroll ones to hit, so it's basically 16.666% extra damage. And obviously that's the same if you get reroll ones to hit from something else. It's just put it on there because obviously that's something free you can get. Whereas obviously your other sources to reroll ones to hit are gonna, be like a command point that will cost you a resource or something. So, and then lastly, barracks on. So look at how much difference that makes to Sky Pikes in barracks on. That suddenly just makes. I mean, I think this visually helps really show the big difference there. Now, not a lot of people like playing barracks on. You don't buy necessarily a shooting army to then go and play the melee oriented sort of play style with it, but it is viable competitively. It's a little bit harder and has a little bit less tools in its arsenal compared to some of the other competitive lists, but it's a fun way to play. So if you're interested in barracks on, then I would say check out the Navigating the Skyports show that we did with Kyle Callip and Adeptus Dice's Alex Thibodeau, and you'll get some really great examples of lists that use Skywardens for barracks on. Okay, so let's move on because and talk about common units. So typically, you'll see units of 3, units of 6, and units of 9. Units of 12, sorry. And you don't see units of 9 very often because units of 9 can't hitch with a sky vessel. The maximum number of models that can hitch with a sky vessel is 7. So you'll very often see units of 6 or 2 units of 3 going around with a ship. Or you might see units of 12. And the reason for this is because of Vapormatic Gold. Being in the Kharadron Overlords army, one of their allegiance abilities is units of 10 or more sky vessels and heroes all get a share of Vapormatic Gold, which lets you use a Triumph once per phase, and a unit of 9 on less than 10. It's just simple math that a unit of 9 unfortunately doesn't get a share of Vapor Gold, whereas if you then bump it up to a unit of 12, then you do, and that can make a big difference in how you use units. So typically, the way these units are used, we start from left to right. Units of 3 mostly used as chaff or screens, in which case it doesn't really matter if you're taking units of 3, whether it's Skywardens or Endrinriggers doesn't really matter much. Now, Skywardens probably can fulfill the role a little bit better because if they're a chaff or a screen, then they're going to be charged, in which case they might be charged by flying units, so they might get the Sky Mines. They don't need to be within an inch of the sky vessel, so they can screen out further away. But having said that, Endrinriggers can do the job just as well. And if you're trying to keep your drop count down, then if you're playing Iron Sky Command, then it's perfectly fine to choose Endrinriggers to do that role. And because they're chaff or screens, they're basically there to die. So realistically, weapon choice doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But mostly you'll see units of 3 go with shooty, like the long range shooty guns, because sometimes they're a tool in your arsenal. These units of 3, in terms of they're a tool to help you do different things. So depending on the battle plan, you might just use them to screen your ship. You fly high and they're set up, just as a speed bump. But if there's a lot of objectives and you haven't typically with a Kharadron Overlords army, you haven't typically got lots of units to hold objectives with. And having these little units of 3 means that you can sit them on an objective in your deployment zone, and then if you have the long range guns, then that means that they can shoot stuff and participate 24 inches away. They're sitting in your deployment zone, but they're participating in the battle a long way away, which can be helpful. And the other thing is, if you are, just use them as chaff or whatever, then when you fly high the ship and you set them up, then they can sort of reach into your opponent's army, just help increase your shooting output a little bit. Now, obviously, Endrinriggers, they can do that with their pistols. Skywardens won't be able to. Something to bear in mind. But you've got when you're flying high with the ships, you're going to have a lot of damage output from 12-inch range. Your damage output with your whole army effectively really drops off beyond 12 inches. Like 12 inches, you've got a lot of damage output, and then it's like 40%, 50% lower as soon as you go beyond that. So by having those long range weapons on those little units of 3 can help, mean that you can play your game from further away, or reach beyond your opponent's screens a little bit more. And then the next sort of common units you'll see is units of 6. That's because of hitching, obviously, so that because they can hitch with a ship. And you basically see 2 different types of units that players will use. They use melee orientated units, and they could be Endrinriggers or Skywardens. More often, people will go more towards Endrinriggers for this, because you'll have the pistols, and then the Endrinriggers pistols will be able to reach after flying high, whereas the Skywardens ones can't. But then it does depend on skyport. If you're playing barracks on, and people will potentially more likely to go with Skywardens. So you'll see a unit of 6, and they have the basic melee weapons and pistols, and then you might see also a skyhook or a grapnel for their abilities, the +1 to charge or the stopping retreat, or maybe both. And that's something you also sometimes see on units of 3 as well. But and then the other thing with units of 6 is you'll just see people taking all the shooty weapons, because they're there just to help, with long range shooting support. Units of 12, people are taking because they want to get the gold share on the unit. They obviously can't hitch, which is why usually if you see people taking units of 12, they will have the long range guns, because they haven't got the ship to help move them around. And actually, the long range guns, you've got 12-inch move, 24-inch range shooting. That's a 36-inch threat range, which is quite big. And then if it's barracks on, you'll see people taking a melee version of that unit. So in more detail, units of 3, you might see a unit of 3 Endrinriggers with 2 swords and a pistol and a skyhook, and that unit will be for their role will be to tag on the end of enemy units. The shoot with their pistols after flying high, and then the skyhook will help them get the charge. Not particularly reliable getting the charge, but you're going to try and tag enemy units with that. Or you might not fly high, but it doesn't matter. The point is that they'll be trying. If you've got a unit like that, you'll be trying to tag enemy units, or just take out small threats. So you'll be trying to something that is easy to kill. Essentially, you don't want to waste a bigger unit on, and they'll be used for chaff as well. They're that's a versatile unit. You'll also see units like this with one sword, and Endrinriggers with 1 sword and pistol, one drill cannon, one volley cannon. Typically, if you have this particular loadout, you'll have, say, more than one version of this unit, and maybe another unit of, say, of a larger size that also has drill cannons. Because if you have drill cannons, then you need to have a lot of them to really start triggering that unmodified 6 roll. So you could see versions of this where the drill cannon is switched out for a grapnel or a skyhook or something. And this version could also be used as Skywardens would do it just as well, relatively speaking, if you're worried about drop count. And lastly, you might see a unit of 3 Skywardens with 2 Skyports pistols and a grapnel launcher. And again, that's, it's a melee option for taking out small units. It can be chaff, but it can also be good for tagging units. Better at tagging units with this option than with this option. Best times of getting into combat, but the grapnel will stop the enemy unit retreating, and it works better with Skywardens than it does with Endrinriggers because of that extra inch range on their melee weapons. Means that because when you tag an enemy unit, the most important thing is you do it in a way that when your opponent piles in, they can't get many models into you. Now, because you've got extra range on your melee weapons on the Skywardens, that's easier to do. You can keep your models further away from a lot of their models, which means that when they pile in, they can get less into combat essentially. But all of these, you could do the same thing essentially with Endrinriggers or Skywardens. It's really only that last thing when you're trying to use, be cheeky and do something very tactical with the grapnel launcher that Skywardens can do it slightly better. Yeah, so let's move on to units of 6. So you'll see melee versions of the unit like this with a skyhook and then 5 swords and pistols. You might see versions with grapnel, but more often skyhook is more likely. You could swap that to a unit of Skywardens if you were in playing Escort Wing, for instance. But Endrinriggers would be more common to see in that role. You see shooting units, both of these really, with 2 volley guns, 2 drill cannons, and 2 swords and pistols. And again, as I said before, the drill cannons could be swapped out. And typically, if you're going for drill cannons, then you might say have this unit and then 2 of this unit. So bring it up to, say, 4 drill cannons. Or you might have 2 of this unit to bring it up to 4. Or, a big unit of 12. If you're only taking 1 of this unit, that's when you consider swapping out the drill cannons. Or say if you're only taking 2 or less of this sort of style unit, and then you don't have any of this unit, then that's when you consider dropping out the drill cannons. I think really, if you're going with drill cannons, you need a total of 3 of them or more to really make them worthwhile. Lastly, units of 12, big shooty units of Endrinriggers. It's basically this, but twice the size. Big shooty units of Skywardens. And that's that, but twice the size. It's simple to over. You'll see Skywardens in this sort of role. In Escort Wing, you'll see Endrinriggers in this sort of role in Iron Sky Command or other lists. And lastly, this last sort of version I thought I'd show you is a sort of type of way you might see Skywardens in Barracks On, which is a melee version of Skywardens where you have 10 skypikes and pistols, a skyhook for more chance of charging, and a grapnel launcher, because then you can sort of charge one unit and then tag another one next to it with the grapnel, or stop that unit from retreating if it's one that you'll take a couple of turns to kill or something. And then also in on, this style of unit could be switched into Skywardens if you wanted to. They're just some examples of configurations, and depending on the types of lists, you will see multiples of these. You might see, this plus 2 of these, or that plus 2 of these. You might see this plus 2 of these. You might see 2 of this and 1 of these. And again, as I said earlier, you might see this and then 2 of these. It's like a configurable way of building. People will sort of, mix and match between the options really, deciding whether they want to have 1 unit with a shooty version and then 2 units of melee, or vice versa, two shooty units and 1 melee unit potentially. But you'll typically see sixes, 3s, or 12s, and typically if you're running say up to 18 models in total, you would see 2/3 of it would be shooting and 1/3 would be melee typically. So hopefully this has given you enough information to really sort of make some decisions of what you want to build. If you're building towards Iron Sky Command Battalion, or attack squadron, or without a battalion, you might be looking more towards Endrinriggers. If you're building towards Escort Wing, then you'll want to look more towards Skywardens. And this gives you an idea of how the weapons are used. Now, if this has been information overload for you, which I could see how it potentially could be, I've got some suggested builds. Okay, so I've got 2 routes here. The one route is based on if you're starting, building your list and you think you're going to be likely going towards the Iron Sky Command Battalion route, and the other option is if you're building towards, you think you're going to go towards the Escort Wing sort of style list. Both are viable. Iron Sky Command will potentially give you a lower drop army. I could see a lot of new plans going towards Escort Wing, because if you buy, say, like the Battle Force box, then you've got 2 gun haulers and a frigate, which is a lot of what you need to play that list. Or if you start with a couple of start collecting boxes and you've got 2 gun haulers, you've got the Thunderers that are in the battalion as well. So Escort Wing is a very easy thing to build to if you buy the bulk discount boxes, basically. You don't have to build towards these battalions, but a lot of people do build towards battalions to get the drop counts down. There is also Attack Squadron, which you can take Endrinriggers or Skywardens in lists. They won't be in the battalion, but you can take them in the list. And if that's something that you think appeals to you, and you really want to play towards something that uses Attack Squadron, then you could consider following the Iron Sky Command route I've got here, because the Endrinriggers do generally map out slightly better. Or if you think, well, I'm going to have the frigate, so I might want to pivot towards Escort Wing in the future, then follow the Escort Wing route. So let's look at these in more detail. Second of all, before we go into details, is these are all in 6s. So these are stages of 6, because if I do it in 3s, it will just go on forever. 6 is a nice easy chunk, and obviously, as I said, you will typically see units of 6, and if you're going to see units of 3, then you could split these in half. Or you'll see 12s, in which case you combine things up. But so my recommendation, if you're building towards an Iron Sky Command battalion style list, is your first 6 models would be 5 Endrinriggers with swords and 1 Endrinrigger with Skyhook. Now, I would strongly recommend magnetizing the tip on that Skyhook, so that you've got the choice of making it a drill cannon or a grapnel launcher later on. That is, of course, optional. You don't need to do that. All of these suggested builds, you don't need to do magnetizing. But if you've never done magnetizing before, this is also a really easy way of getting into it, because you haven't got to do any drilling to countersink the magnets. You literally just get some super glue and stick them on, and as long as they're small enough magnets, they won't be noticeable. You can even do it without painting over the magnets if you want to, because they're silver and then the tips of your guns will be silver. But the reason I recommend going with a melee option as your first build with is because you get shooting from other parts of your list. You can get quasi sort of melee from your ships where they drop bombs in the combat phase, or they can you can get things like the Dealbreaker battle ram and the Deck Settler Spartorpedo where you'll do damage on the charge. But realistically, any actual bog standard melee output, normal melee output that isn't from an ability or like an artifact or something, is going to come either from your Skyriggers or heroes like the Endrin Masters or Admirals. And you might not choose to have those in your list because there's lots of other heroes to choose from. And you need to have at least one melee option in a list. So go with that as your first choice. So 5 Endrinriggers, swords and pistols, 1 Endrinrigger with a skyhook to get the extra chance of charging. And then your second 6, you build 2 Endrinriggers with swords and pistols, 2 Endrinriggers with volley cannons, and 2 Endrinriggers with drill cannons. Now, if you don't think you're going to go beyond 12 models in total, you could switch the drill cannons out if you wanted to. It's optional, and I obviously again recommend magnetizing them. But basically, then after building your first 6 and the second 6, you then got basically 2 different units to do different roles: a melee unit and a shooting unit. And then if you're going down a route where you think you're going to play Escort Wing, then my first recommendation is 5 Skywardens with skypikes and pistols, and then 1 Endrinrigger with skyhook. Now, if you've also got Thunderix Profiteers, which I really thoroughly recommend buying, whether you're going to go Endrinriggers or Skywardens, buy Thunderix Profiteers. It's a bargain, and you can if you want to know why I recommend that, then go check out the video I did about the Battle Force box and what to buy when you first start Kharadron Overlords, because basically it's a bargain. But in that set you will get a Skywarden with a Skypike pistol, so you've got 1 extra. So that's actually a mistake there. That should say 4. So you build for your first build of Escort Wing. I'd say you build 5 Skywardens with Skypikes and pistols, but if you've got Thunderix Profiteers, then you only need to build 4. You'll build 1 Endrinrigger with a Skyhook, and then if you've got Thunderix Profiteers, you'll build an Endrinrigger with a sword and pistol. For reasons that I'll reveal in a little bit, but I want to talk about something else first. Just having that Endrinrigger with a sword and pistol will be handy going forwards. Let's just say that. So what you'll notice is I've got Skywardens and Endrinriggers, and I'm saying build that for your first 6. Which you might think, well, that you can't mix Endrinriggers and Skywardens. Now, no, you can't have a unit that's half Endrinriggers and Skywardens and play them as half Endrinriggers and Skywardens. But if you've got an Endrinrigger with a Skyhook, when it's on the table, it's a Balloon Boy with a Skyhook. And if it's sitting next to 5 Skywardens with Skypikes and pistols and Skymines, and it's in the same unit, then 99% of your opponents will be like, okay, fine, he's a Skywarden. If that 1% chance of opponents that will look at it and go, oh well, actually he's an Endrinrigger because he's got the different head, or he hasn't got the Skymine, then you say, well, head options doesn't matter. First of all, now, no one's going to say it because the head. They might go, well, he hasn't got a Skymine. Well, if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter because the ability triggers if the unit has a Skymine and you roll based on enemy models. So it doesn't matter that he hasn't got Skymine. The only thing you could say is if once that unit has been half destroyed and all of these guys are dead, you could say, well, look, if it gets to that point, I won't roll for Skymines if you charge that Endrinrigger with Skyhook. But the thing is, the way you'll take your damages out is he'll probably be the first to go because once they're in combat, they're the weapons that are going to do damage. So yeah, that's my first suggestion for building with Escort Wing. And the reason you go melee first is, again, it's the same as with Iron Sky Command. It's you don't have the other melee options in your toolkit, and if you think you're going to be doing Escort Wing, then you can have Thunderers that are going to be doing the shooting, or a lot of your shootings. So, yeah. For the second 6, if you're going down the Escort Wing route, I say 2 Skywardens with Sky Pikes and Pistols, 2 Endrinriggers with volley cannons, and 2 Endrinriggers with drill cannons. And again, the same as before, these 2 guys are going to be sitting next to these guys. So when your opponent looks at that unit, it's like, well, they'll be most 99% of opponents will be fine with you saying that's a unit of Skywardens, because you'll have some Sky Mines and Sky Pikes in the unit, and they go, when they look at that unit 6, they can go, well, okay, they're Skywardens. Now, the difference is, because this is a shooting unit, you might take these guys out first when you take damages, but the likelihood is, if you're playing Escort Wing, you might have if you've got more than one unit, then you'll probably only have Skywardens anyway to keep your drop count down. So it's not like they can go, oh, I thought they were Endrinriggers, because you say, well, you saw my list and they were all Skywardens. All my units are Skywardens, and they were, Skywardens a turn ago. They weren't going to magically switch to Endrinriggers. So 99% of the time, you will be fine to put this on the table and play it as a unit of Skywardens. And this is really basically my big tip / hack is if, when you're building Skywardens, when you use the long range guns, if you leave the Sky Mines off, then that will give you a lot of flexibility going forwards. Because technically there'll be Endrinriggers, but it will give you a lot of flexibility for pivoting, how you play them later, which you'll see in a screen coming up. So then, if you want to expand up to 18, which you don't necessarily need to do, you could quite easily play a list that only has 12 up to 12 Endrinriggers or Skywardens, but it's also not uncommon to see lists that have 18. So for Iron Sky Command, my next recommendation is to build another 6 shooty guys, basically. And then the reason I recommend that is because it gives you some choice. So you still got, from your first build, your melee guys. And then with this 6 and the 6 before, it gives you the option of running a big unit of 12. Now you can split them into 2 units of 6 if you want to, or a unit of 6 and 2 chaff units of 3. Point is, by having all these shooty ones, it gives you some options. And you're not going to want to charge 2 melee units in the same turn anyway, because one will fight, and then the other one, your opponent will fight first and kill them potentially. So, yeah, that's my recommendation if you're building a team towards Iron Sky Command. And that also kind of works for attack squadron or non-battalion lists as well. If you're building towards an Escort Wing style list, then again, it's basically the same. I recommend building 2 Skywardens with Skypikes and Pistols, 2 Endrinriggers with volley guns, and 2 Endrinriggers with drill cannons. And again, as I said before, you'll be fine to play that as a unit of Skywardens 99% of the time. And again, that then gives you the option of, playing, your melee unit of 6, or playing a big unit of 12 shooter guys, or 2 units of 6 shooter guys, or a unit of 6 shooter guys and 2 units of 3 shooter. You just got all the different configurations there potentially. So that's that. So let's come to your next 6, which probably from 99% of people, if you have got this far, this would be your final 6. And this is the magic moment. This is where, if you have followed my suggestions, in which case, obviously, as I said before, if you've got a specific list you're building to, you don't have to follow these suggestions. These are suggestions for people that aren't sure what they want to build. this is where you get to pivot. So if you've been following the Iron Sky command route, my next suggestion is you then build 4 Skywardens with sky pikes and pistols. Now, if you've got Thunderous Profiteers, you only need to build 3. As I mentioned earlier, Thunderous Profiteers comes with a Skywarden with sky pipe. Then 1 Endrinrigger with a skyhook and 1 Endrinrigger with a sword and pistol. Now, and then if you've got Thunderous Profiteers, I would say build an Endrinrigger with a grapple launcher for that 4th model, rather than because you'll be building 3 Skywardens with skypacks and pistols. So what that allows you to do is these 4 models you've just built lets you do that. So you build 4, just by building 4 new models, you then suddenly get a 12-man unit that you didn't have before, because you've already got these Endrinriggers with drill cannons and body guns, and then you add in 4 Skywardens with skypikes and pistols, and all of a sudden you've got a 12-man Skywarden unit. So that's part of the reason why I've suggested this whole build is because it lets you then, if you build towards an Iron Sky command style list, you can then actually if you want to, you can pivot towards playing Escort Wing, because you've got 12 Skywardens there, and you can put into an Escort Wing battalion. The extra skyhook here, your extra skyhook here, then means that actually, and then plus with this extra Endrinrigger sword pistol, also then gives you the option of playing 2 melee-oriented units. So 2 units with a skyhook and 5 swords and pistols. So this last 6 is all about giving you more options now, and letting you pivot, because you won't ever really need to put 24 models in a list, really, to be honest. But it just lets you pivot. And then the same thing roughly, if you've been following the Escort Wing route, you build for your last 6 4 Endrinriggers with swords and pistols. 2, let's just say 3. Must have lowered the wrong one before, which is why the other one was wrong. So yeah, 4 Endrinriggers with swords and pistols. If you've got Thunderous Profiteers, yeah, ignore that as well. If you've got Thunderous Profiteers, then you only need to build 3 because you built one earlier. We come back to here. You built an Endrinrigger with a sword and pistol there because you had Thunderous Profiteers. So you only need 3. But then what that then allows you to do is this. You already have these from your previous builds, and by adding 4 swords and pistols, you can suddenly take all your Skywardens that you had, and you've now got 12 Endrinriggers that you can play in Iron Sky Command if you want to. Now you can play them in 2 units of 6 like this, or you can combine them to one big unit of 12, or as I said, you can have a unit of 6 and 2 3s, whatever. But all of a sudden you've got shooty Endrinriggers that you can put on the table instead of Endrinriggers. So that's handy. And then lastly, I recommend building another Skywarden with a skypike and pistol, and then an Endrinrigger with a skyhook. Now, that should bring your total number of skypikes and pistols up to 10, and your total number of skyhooks up to 2. So what that allows you to do is run 2 of this unit if you want to in Escort Wing. So you could run that, and then so you can run 2 melee units in Escort Wing if you want, or you could do that in Barracks On, or you could have a unit of 12 in Barracks On with 2 skyhooks. So that last build of 6 for Escort Wing lets you pivot to it, playing an Iron Sky Command list if you want to, with 2 units of Endrinriggers, and it lets you pivot to playing Barracks On as well. So that is everything. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please do hit like. I'm planning on hopefully doing more videos like this in the future, maybe something to do with thunderers, because that's another common question. So if you want to be able to catch those, and also please do subscribe. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon, Skyfarers.